ஒரே ஒரு 5 லிட்டர் இதய மந்த்ரா கடல் எண்ணெய் பேக் ஒரு மாசம் முழுசுக்கும் அத்தனை சமையல முடிச்சு விடலாம். இதய மந்த்ரா.
So my first question is, why did Trump not follow his own 2 weeks deadline to strike Iran?
Knowing the way Donald Trump thinks and speaks privately and publicly about his strategic thinking, 2 weeks was never meant to actually involve just 14 days. It was within 2 weeks, which meant it could have taken 14 days, it could have taken 14 hours, it could have taken a day and a half. So we don't know to what extent this was always planned to be something within a day and a half or two, but it never meant it was going to take a full 14 days, just something within that time span. My own sense is right now, in retrospect, that they knew that this was going to be something at the beginning of that 14-day period, but so much deception and decoying went into this to try to ensure that the Iranians were not ready to take down any stealth bombers, any of the fighter jets, anything that was part of this operation. So this seems to have all been quite deliberate to make sure that this was going to be an operational success for the U.S. military.
Mm-hmm. You must have seen the reactions from global powers, especially China, Russia, and European countries. Do you think Iran will retaliate and Iran will find support from these global powers?
I would be very surprised if there were not some measure of retaliation by the Iranian government. First of all, to save face with their own people, right? I mean, there's 85 to 90 million Iranians, most of whom, by the way, are Persian, but 45% or so are not Persian, but are Azeris and a number of other ethnicities. So there is no single Iranian/Persian body of support for this government. But I think first and foremost, regime survival is the paramount interest right now for the supreme leader, Khamenei, and for the leaders of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, or whatever new leaders are in place after this series of very successful assassinations and executions by the Israeli Defense Forces of the government and military leaders in Iran over the last week and a half. But in terms of international support, my own sense is that there will be very little support, not only from Europe, but even from Iran's Gulf neighbors. I mean, most of these are Sunni Arab countries whom Iran has actively sought to undermine, destabilize, and overthrow for the last 46 years, ever since this radical Shia theocracy took over the government in Tehran. Now, will they voice objections to the U.S. operation? Yes, they will. It'll be mostly rhetorical exercises, and most likely behind the scenes, government leaders in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, Egypt, Oman are all very, very happy that this is taking place and that there's the potential strategic weakening of Iran as a regional destabilizer and the world's leading international sponsor of state terrorism. So we need to keep all of this in mind in terms of 45 years of malign behavior by Iran in the region. On a strategic level, China is probably expected to continue to support Iran to some very, very careful degree. One, first of all, China gets an enormous amount of oil, some years as much as 50%, half of all of its imported oil from Iran. And so those energy ties and commercial ties are very important. And Iran, of course, sells a good amount of its oil to China because the previous administration here in Washington, the Biden administration, looked the other way and refused to enforce sanctions on the purchase of oil in order to try to persuade Supreme Leader Khamenei and his government to come to the table and negotiate an end to the nuclear weapons program that ultimately proved unsuccessful. Russia is an interesting case. Russia also wants to balance its ties to a number of Gulf Sunni Arab countries and with Israel, especially now that there is a potential vacuum that's being filled in Syria, where Russia had an outsized military presence for about 10 years. And now that Iran has been expelled from Syria, Russia will probably look to balance its relations with Iran, for whom it's provided a significant amount of nuclear energy technology, along with those of Israel and the Gulf Arab countries that would like to see Iran weakened. I don't think Iran is going to find much international support beyond maybe the kinds of sort of subnational trade between China and Iran regarding rocket fuels and parts to help support its military, but nothing on the overt side. There'll be a lot of rhetorical support for Iran, or at least condemnations of the United States, but probably most of the world that's been engaged with Iran to one measure or another is quite happy with the outcome of last night's military operation.
And what would be the immediate effect on global oil markets or supply, as Iranian parliament has passed a resolution and which will somehow disrupt the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, we don't know if there'll actually be any disruption. The Iranian parliament voted to effectuate a change in the oil flows out of the Strait of Hormuz. Again, much of this could just be for domestic show and face saving. I don't know that anyone really believes that Iran is going to threaten to collapse its own economy by cutting off the flow of oil, Iranian oil, not only to China, but to India, two major purchasers of oil from Iran. It wouldn't be cutting off its nose to spite its face. It would be cutting off its head to spite its face. So I think much of this right now is rhetorical bluster. There may be some efforts to mine or to disrupt, to a certain degree, some shipping through the Iranian side of the Strait of Hormuz, which probably will mean that most shipping will simply move to the Oman and Emirati side of the Strait of Hormuz, the southern half of that strait, and that's one that can be protected by the United States. And if they feel that the Iranian military, or there really is no Iranian military, again, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, if they are actively seeking to disrupt the shipping of oil out of Iran, out of the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz, my sense is you'll see a massive, overwhelming military response by the United States government to cripple and potentially utterly destroy Iran's oil economy. If Iran is willing to do this to its own oil economy, then maybe the U.S. will help move it along. So I think it would be extraordinarily foolish and reckless for the Iranian government to take any serious, significant steps to curtail the shipment of oil out of the Strait of Hormuz. But that doesn't mean it can't happen. The Iranian government, and especially the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, feel very wounded right now, and there's no telling that they may not undertake some type of a reckless, foolish, and highly irrational step in order to save face for themselves and to try to preserve the regime.
Do you anticipate regime change in Iran?
There's really no way to tell. I mean, I think President Trump was quite clear that this was not the intention of the attack on the nuclear facilities. It wasn't even an attack on the Iranian government. This really was an attack against the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is the paramilitary force that really has the upper hand on all military, police, and paramilitary operations, both within Iran and really the great exporter of terror throughout the Middle East and beyond, into South Asia and into Europe. And I think the calculations on the part of the Trump administration were, what would happen if the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps was able to build a nuclear weapon or several, and then you have a global terrorist network that is armed with a nuclear weapon, or as many as 10 within several weeks, based on the assessments of a number of intelligence agencies. So we don't know if there's going to be regime change in Iran. I think what most of the world, including the Middle Eastern neighbors of Iran, would like to see first and foremost is regime behavior change. Again, to stop destabilizing Middle Eastern governments, to stop threatening to annihilate an entire nation state, that is right now Israel, to stop exporting terror throughout the Middle East, into South Asia, into Europe, and even here in the United States, and to end its very aggressive ballistic missile program. These are the essential steps that most, if not all, of Iran's neighbors would like to see take place. If regime change does take place organically by the Iranian people, who are disgusted by nearly a half century of relative impoverishment, while the Iranian government has used tens of billions of dollars, if not hundreds of billions, to build up this radical global terror network, the IRGC, to build up a ballistic missile program and to destabilize, threaten, and terrorize its neighbors at the expense of building up the infrastructure and the economy and the society for 85 to 90 million Iranians, well, that's up to the Iranian people to decide.
And how might Iran retaliate militarily? Would it be direct or through proxies like Hezbollah or Houthis?
I think Iran possibly has a number of tools available to it. First of all, in terms of a direct military threat, we may see heavier rockets and missiles than have been deployed to date against Israeli civilian targets. That may be one of the easier ones, especially as there is great concern in Israel about a diminution of its arrow interceptors and the David Sling missile shield beyond Iron Dome, which really is intended more for the scrappy rockets and missiles coming from Hamas and Hezbollah, as opposed to tactical ballistic missiles coming from Iran. But we're very much concerned about 40,000, that's 40,000 American servicemen and women in bases in Kuwait, in Iraq, in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, in Qatar, in the United Arab Emirates that may come under threat from Iran. There's also the use of cyber attacks. Iran has a very skilled sub-state network of cyber actors who might look to cripple aspects of the American infrastructure network or those of our European or Asian allies in order to get back at the United States indirectly. We may also see a step-up activity of terrorist cells in Europe, in South Asia, or even here within the United States, especially because 10 to 20 million illegal aliens entered the United States for 4 years under the previous administration. And you don't need more than 100 or 500 sleepers to be able to wreak Hamas-like devastation in the American society if Iran were to do so. But triggering any of these, and if the United States government is able to trace any of this back to Tehran, would again lead to massive, overwhelming retaliation that could see a complete decapitation of the Iranian government and massive destruction of Iran's oil economy, its energy infrastructure, and everything that is so important for the survival of the radical theocratic regime and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. So I think the United States has, retains, and will maintain for the long run escalation dominance over Iran. And I think it's very important for the Iranian government to begin to think realistically about their diminishing leverage vis-a-vis the United States and other actors in the region.
My last question related to India. How do you assess India's position? Because India has historical ties with Iran, and PM Modi has spoken with Iranian president as well a few hours after this strike. And it has very strong ties with Israel as well. Diplomatically, how difficult it is for the situation is for India?
This is, I think, a great challenge not only for Prime Minister Modi, but for all well-intentioned leaders who are looking, A, to prevent any further escalation of the war between Israel and Iran, and to help persuade Iran's leaders that their activities to date, that investing $500 billion over the last 40 years in a nuclear weapons program was a foolish, reckless, and stupid policy of Ayatollah Khamenei, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and a country like India that has a very independent foreign policy, that has both a good working partnership with the United States, that has cordial diplomatic relations with Iran as well as with Russia, and a growing number of countries throughout Asia and especially in Europe, can play a very important, significant, honest broker role between Washington and Tehran. But I think the burden is on Tehran to trust Delhi to be able to carry forward its message of a desire for peace, for coexistence, and for a normalization of relations with the Gulf Arab region and with Israel, and frankly, for that matter, with countries in Southwestern Asia, in Southwest Asia and Southern Asia, including India. And it's really up to Iran to make the decision to become a normal country led by a normal government, as opposed to a radical global terror network joined to a radical theocratic Islamist Shia theology that has made the world very dangerous, that has made life very dangerous for 90 million Iranians. And Godspeed to Prime Minister Modi if he can play that role that I think would be very much welcomed by Israel, by the European Union, by the United States, and almost every country that desires to see peace, security, and prosperity across the Middle East and deep into South Asia.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us, and have a nice day.
Thank you. Be sure to send me the link when you're done with this, okay?